So I decided to start making a video step-by-step series on the turbo Civic engine I'm building right now. What I am working on is a D16Y7 block, and right now at the current step I have installed the crankshaft, the oil pump, and the rear main seal back there. So I'm going to step back to doing step one of this entire build is having the entire block stripped down, bare bones, nothing on it. And that's going to include the crankshaft. So on the bottom here, we've got what's called either the girdle or the main bearing cap. So you've got your crankshaft, main bearing cap, block, and this has 10 bolts in it. So when you finally get all the blocks stripped down, everything's off, this is going to be one of the last things you take off. You undo these, you take them out, and the crankshaft will lift straight out of here. So what I had done to this block is I had all of the mounting surfaces finished. So I had the oil pan resurfaced, I had the heads mounting surface resurfaced, I had any of these mounting surfaces on the side just touched up a little bit and resurfaced. And I had the bearing seats in the main all resurfaced as well to clean everything up. And then I had the same done for the girdle, and I had the same done for the crankshaft itself on all the rod bearing points and the main bearing points. Had all that resurfaced and refinished. In total, I think it ran me about $240 at a machine shop. But on top of that, I also had the block bored out, 75.5 millimeters, so I have a little overbore. And one of the things to look for, specifically when you're doing turbo builds from a machine shop you may not be used to, is to check the way in which they did their honing on the block. You can kind of see in this picture that there's a cross hatching across the surface, and that is exactly what you want for your finish when you're doing a full block hone and refinish like I'm doing. Even if you're doing a naturally aspirated build, these are all going to be things you're going to want to do to clean this block up to get it ready to be put back together. The big thing I was doing this for on this block is it is from an overheated engine. So this engine was run without coolant, overheated, failed. So I pretty much got the block and all associated parts for free, and decided to do a Civic turbo build. You know, why not? So after I got the block back, crankshaft, main bearing cap, I got my main bearings and my rod bearings. I got those parts from Speed Factory. They've got a good listing of Civic build parts. There's a lot of websites out there you can use. Speed Factory was just one of the ones I ended up using for some of these parts. So I got standard bearings because I didn't have any material taken out from the bearing area itself. I just had it resurfaced, basically polished. So it was a nice smooth surface rather than actually having it reground and resurfaced like I would if I wanted to change out the bearing size, whether I wanted a thicker or a smaller bearing. So those are options you can look at for different types of turbo builds. I went with standard bearings, and the biggest step to where did I put those? Biggest step to putting your crankshaft back together is checking your bearing spacing between your bearing and your crankshaft, and that would be using one of these guys, a plastic gauge. Pick this up at AutoZone. It's a tiny plastic filament. You cut segments of this off and you put it onto the bearing itself. So basically I've got my block, then I've got my bearing sitting on the main bearings, all 5 of them, right? And then I'm going to put these little plastic bits on each bearing, and usually it's best to make them about the width of the bearing area. And then I'm going to set the crankshaft on it. You need to set it directly down onto it. Don't let the crankshaft rotate. And then on the girdle, I'm going to have all the bearings inside of there, and then I'm going to put those plastic filaments on top of the crankshaft, put the girdle on, And I'm going to go and tighten down the main cap or girdle bolts. And the way you do that is in a step 1, step 2 pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the spec itself from the shop manual is 18 foot-pounds step 1, 38 foot-pounds step 2. So you're going to fully torque this down doing, star outwards pattern for 18 foot-pounds, and then you're going to do 38, and then you're going to go and loosen it all up, and you're going to take off the main cap. And when you do this, you need to make sure that you don't rotate it. You need to try and take it off as vertically as possible. The same thing for the crankshaft. Don't rotate it. You need to pick it up out of the bearing area. And what these little filaments will do is mush into a measurable smear, basically. And you come use the paper part of the gauge itself to tell you what your bearing clearance is. So this is a green set, and there's 3 different colors, green, red, and I think yellow. So, a smear this big would be 0.001 versus 0.0015, 002, 003. 0.002 is the service interval for standard Honda OEM bearings on a standard build. 0.002 is a good aiming point for an aftermarket build. Once you get up into 0.003, that's kind of getting to be a little too much bearing space. When I did my test, I came up between 0.0012 and 0.0015, so pretty much somewhere between these two-ish, but definitely smaller than 0.0015. So my bearing clearance is good for the standard bearings that I got. If you find that your spacing is too much, you need to get thickened bearings. And on most aftermarket bearing places, you can choose bearings with a thicker material, so you can eat up that distance of spacing, because you need there to be as minimal play as possible. Once you're all good, clean the plastic gauge off, put all this back on in the same order you did. Bearings, crankshaft, girdle with bearings on, bolts, star pattern out, 18 foot-pounds, 38 foot-pounds, and you're good. You've got your crankshaft in, you've got your girdle on with all your main cap bolts, and next step would be moving on to things like the oil pump and the rear main seal. Get the most bottom end of the block together, and that'll be another video.